is the fourth. So when you circle, let's say number one, you can just put your own. Then you can put one. One is the least. The one is the highest. Yeah, yeah. Four is the highest. So you can circle which one you think is. Is that clear? Yeah. Okay, no?
We're going to jump into this. We're going to start with a PowerPoint, but I happen to have all the answers right here. So take your hand out, and the top of your hand out says birth to 36 months. That means that we're going to be talking about what PT did from the day of birth, times to 36 months, and then from 4 years old up. As preschoolers, one of the things that I've noticed as I travel around churches, very often in nurseries and in younger preschool classes, I see people that come in there on a rotating basis, parents that come in like once every 3 or 4 months or whatever, and they seem to assume that their job is to change a diaper, give a child a bottle, and then stand around talking to the adults. And the assumption there is that, sorry about that, this guy's not very smart, is he? Nope. Okay, the assumption is they must not be able to learn anything. But I want us to realize that there is a reason we teach kids from the day they're born, from the time they're newborn babies. And the first reason is because they have a spirit. Do you believe that every human being on the face of the earth has a spirit from the day they're born? Of course they do. So we teach them because they have a spirit. We teach them because they're curious. Aren't babies curious? They're constantly looking around. Or they may stare at somebody constantly, for like 3 or 4 minutes. They're figuring something out. I don't know what's going on in their minds. It's probably a good thing we don't know what's going on in their minds much of the time. But we teach them because they're curious. Another reason we teach newborns and babies is because they have uncluttered minds. Their minds are not filled with all of their great successes and how wonderful I am, and so they can still be taught. Okay? Now, when we look at the word child in the scriptures, the Hebrew word for child means from birth to adolescence. So when it says train up in the way they should go, it means start training them from the day they are born in the direction they should be going. Okay? So it's birth to adolescence. Now, a lot of people say, wait a minute, what can a newborn, what can these little teeny babies, what can they really learn? Well, the truth is they can learn a great deal. Does anybody know who Fanny Crosby was? Fanny Crosby was a woman that was born many years ago, and an interesting thing happened to her. At 6 weeks, she contracted an eye disease, and a guy that wasn't a doctor pretended to be a doctor and treated her and blinded her. Shortly after that, her father died, and her mother had to go to work. Okay? And so she was raised by her grandmother. Now, her grandmother did something very interesting. Her grandmother read the Bible to her constantly throughout the day. When she was 6, 8, 10, 12, a year old, 18 months old, she read this Bible constantly to her granddaughter. She did this through her elementary years, homeschooling her. By the time Fanny Crosby was 11 years old, she had the first 5 books of the Bible, Psalms, Proverbs, and the entire New Testament memorized. So don't tell me babies can't learn things. As a matter of fact, one of the things that we have learned, everybody knows who Dr. Ben Carson is these days. One of the things we have learned, don't worry about it, from Dr. Ben Carson is that a child's core beliefs and the foundation for their worldview is established by the time they are 2 years old. What does that mean? It means the way they are going to look at the world, the way a preschooler, a child, is going to look at the world for the rest of their life is established by the people who in their life influence them in those first 2 years. Did you know that by the time a child is 3, that 90% of the brain growth has taken place? That's amazing, isn't it? So a great deal happens in the brain of an infant and of a child. And so what we know is that when they are born, everything they smell, taste, feel, hear, everything they experience is brand new. Why wouldn't we then take the opportunity from the day they're born to teach them that everything you are experiencing was made by our wonderful God for your pleasure, for you? That's why we want to teach very young children. The other thing that we can do by teaching them from the day they're born is we can help them come to realize from a very early age that God is at work in the world they live in all the time. Don't you wish you had learned that when you were a preschooler and you had it in your heart tonight? Wouldn't it make most of your problems seem pretty small? To have a worldview that says, my God is at work in my world all the time, regardless of what comes my way. And these are the things we can establish in a young child's life at a very, very early age. And that is the time, though we don't see them comprehending, that we introduce them from day one to God and to Jesus. That is, we talk about Him all the time. We talk about Him constantly. Harut mentioned something that she remembered me sharing in the workshop at the Bass Convention when I did this. And what I shared was this, that a few years ago when we were getting ready to move from Florida to Georgia, my senior pastor sent me an email. He said, why don't you retire from Disciple Land? Why don't you not move to Georgia? And why don't you come on staff and help me with adult ministries? And I sent him an email back. And I said, Alan, I want you to know something. When I finally retire, I am going to spend the rest of my life in the nursery, leaning over cribs and reading the Bible to newborns. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to spend the rest of my life, once I'm able to retire, I'm just going to go in the nursery. I'm just going to read God's Word to newborn babies. Because you see, I don't think Fanny Crosby was a one of a kind. I think we can influence a lot of newborns by teaching them from the day they are born that our God did it, our God created it, He created it for us, for His glory, and it's all about Him. So what do infants and toddlers need from us? What do preschoolers need from us? They need consistency. Now, you have a very hard time in your church with what I would normally suggest because you have one service and you have the children meeting during that service and the children in the nursery during that service. My church has 2 services with Sunday school in between. So it's very easy to be consistent. But I'm a firm believer that we need to be consistent in our preschool classrooms, especially with the babies. Now, if you're a mom, you know something that most men don't know. A child in a crib in a church will know who is in that room with them by the sound of the voice, by the aroma of the body, and by the touch of the hands. When we have new people in the classrooms over and over and over every single week, it does not create a sense of security for young children. So that's why I'm a believer, if we're only going to be there like 2 weeks, we need to be there that 2 weeks. Even for bed babies, we should swing through there, let them hear our voice, touch each one of them, and then leave the room. Does that make sense to you? They desperately need consistency in their life. And then they need us to be enthusiastic and stimulating their senses. They need that. And then they need us to make it our goal in life to lay a God-centered foundation in their lives. That the next preschool teacher, the elementary teachers, the middle school, the youth, and the adult teachers, they can build on that foundation that has been laid. So, as we teach preschoolers, as we teach them as God made them, we're going to look real quickly at the 5 stages of human growth and development. So on your handout there, I believe page 2, it says 5 areas of human growth and development. And we as a church are constantly involved in these 5 areas. Every time a child comes onto the campus, we're involved in these 5 areas of human growth and development. The first is called physical. Second is social. Third, under C, so A is physical, B is social, C is emotional, D is intellectual, and E is spiritual. Now, here's the deal. If we are working with preschoolers, we have to understand that kids have to move through certain stages of development before they're ready to go on to the next stage. We also have to understand, working with preschoolers, that they move at their own rate in each of these stages of development, and pushing them probably does no good whatsoever. But what's really important is every stage of development in a young child's life affects another stage of development. Let me give you an example. Let's suppose that a very young boy at maybe age 2 is thrown a ball. And they have a problem, a neurological problem, that translates into a physical problem. And that is the signal from the brain says, put your hands together to catch the ball. But the signals come late. So what happens? The ball goes through the hands, and then the hands come together. You have the picture? Very early on, what does that child learn? I'm no good at playing catch. Now that child gets a little bit older, and they enroll in Cub Scouts. They go to a Cub Scout meeting, and they do their book thing, and then all the Cub Scouts want to go outside and play catch. But this kid knows something. I'm no good at this. So that physical impediment translates into emotional as well as social, and that child stays away from the kids his age who are playing catch and goes and plays with preschoolers. So every area of development affects another area, and so we need to be sensitive to that. Okay? Lady came across the street to my house one time, and she knocked on my door, and I answered the door. Her name is Joanne. She says, I have a big problem. She says, my daughter, she's not developing as far as her language is concerned, and all of her friends can speak, and they can put sentences together. And my daughter can't do that. And I said, Joanne, that is called a blessing. I said, but your daughter can do something physically that they can't do. She says, what? I said, yeah, she can throw rocks really hard all the way across the street and hit my car. About 6 months later, there was a knock on my door. It was Joanne. She talks all the time. She won't shut up. She's driving me crazy. I said, I told you it was a blessing, but you wouldn't listen to me. So what am I saying? And this guy, Jack Heim, says this. He says, if the satisfactions of these early stages of development are not met, that person could very easily go on acting like they're 2-year-old in some areas of their life for the rest of their life. Anybody ever go to a coin-operated car wash? You know, where you put in the quarters and you play beat the clock to see if you can wash your car. So there's this guy, he had to be about 75. He's at the car wash. He put in $1.25, and I'm saying to myself, this is going to be interesting. I'm going to watch. He got his car wet. He got soap halfway on his car, and what happened? Ran out of time. This guy in his 70s takes the brush, throws it on the ground, starts stomping on it, and cussing at it. I said, I think he missed something as a preschooler. Somebody didn't get to him emotionally. Crazy, isn't it? So, as we look at the physical growth, the fill-in-the-blanks are there is that the preschooler is a small person. So we ask ourselves in our classroom, where are the pictures? What are the chairs like? Do we have them in a room that is shared by older kids, and so we equip it for older kids, or do we equip it for them? So we need to be sensitive to that. The preschooler is also active. Every preschooler is a kinesthetic learner. What does that mean? Every preschooler needs a lot of large muscle movement so that they can twirl around and they can run and they can get this movement of the large muscles. So we have to give them opportunities for movement. And a good means of providing this activity is have your students act out the Bible story. Let them role play. Preschoolers love role-playing because it gives them an opportunity to be up, to be moving, to be active. Okay? Number C, the preschooler is vulnerable. They are sensitive to their surroundings. Did you know that a preschooler would prefer to be in a room where the lights are dim and not real bright, and where the music is soft and not loud? Because bright lights hurt there, and loud music hurts there. So we have to be sensitive to that. I'm changing all the light bulbs at the Christian school where my kids go. And I was asking them, do you want me to change them in the preschool classrooms, or do you want me to leave the dimmer lights? They had no idea why I would even ask such a dumb question, because they had no idea. I said, if I put these really bright LEDs in here, your preschoolers are going to be going like this all the time. I said, why don't we leave the dimmer lights so it doesn't hurt their eyes? So we want to be sensitive to those things in their life. We want to be sensitive to their physical growth and what their needs are. The next thing we have to be sensitive to is their social growth. Remember I talked about the kingdom-centered classroom culture? This is really important for preschoolers because the preschooler is ego-centered. What does ego-centered mean? It means that every preschooler truly believes that the whole world is revolving around them and I am the center of the solar system. That's what they think, don't they? And that's why they struggle with authority. Because they don't want someone telling them no or telling them what they have to do. Now, why is that? Because a 2- and 3-year-old child does not think in terms of right and wrong. They don't have that capability. So does that mean, for instance, that we don't correct them when they do something wrong or praise them when they do something right? Well, absolutely not. Did you know that actually the ability to fully comprehend the consequences of my actions does not come until I'm in my early 20s when the frontal lobes of the brain grow together? And that's when I have the ability to fully understand the consequences of my actions. And that's why I did so many dumb things as a teenager. Because it looked like fun, I could show off, but I wasn't capable of understanding fully the consequences of my actions and choices. So do we not teach them this is right and this is wrong? Well, yes, we do. Because as this lady Selma Frailberg says, when we teach preschoolers right from wrong, when we make them apologize even though they have no idea why they're doing it, we are establishing patterns of behavior for their future. That is, they will develop habits that are patterns of behavior, so that ultimately, when they do understand consequences and right and wrong, now it makes sense as to why I do right and why I apologize for wrong. Does this make sense? Letter C, the preschooler is home-centered. What does that mean? Home is where they feel safe, comfortable, where they want to be. Sure. I was at Washington Dulles Airport one time, and there was this really tall mom and dad. And they were obviously late for their flight. And they were walking like this with their suitcases. And behind them was about a 3-year-old. And the little 3-year-old had his suitcase. And he's like this. And right in front of me, he stopped. He threw his suitcase down, and he yelled out to everybody in the airport, "I want to go home." That's why in our preschool classrooms, we need to have a home living center. We need to have that, fake refrigerator and stove and couch, etc. Because that's where they feel safe, and that's where a preschooler will tell you a lot of stuff. That's where they will get really, really honest. When I'm in the home center, very, very often, I'll go into the home center with preschoolers, and I'm sitting on a chair their size, and they are going over to the stove, and I'm eating hundreds of pretend cookies and drinking hundreds of cups of pretend tea. And it's at that point that a preschooler very often will disclose their heart. We had a little girl in our classroom that we suspected was either abused or ignored at home. And I was in the home living center with her. And I was eating her pretend cookies and drinking her pretend tea. And I was talking to her, and all of a sudden she stopped, and she came over, and she sat down on my knee, and she grabbed my face, and she turned it toward her, and she said, "I wish you were my daddy." We have such a wonderful opportunity with preschoolers to be Jesus in the flesh and meet needs that may not be met at home. The preschooler is beginning to be interested in friends, but getting along with others is one of the biggest learning tasks of the 2-year-old's life. In other words, they do a lot of parallel play, playing alongside someone, but they're not yet capable of doing cooperative play. And that's why they don't understand sharing. They don't understand sharing. And so it's really difficult for preschoolers to be in a classroom where we have limited toys. You may have 10 preschoolers and 2 or 3 toys. You're asking for trouble because they're not going to understand sharing yet. Always make sure there's plenty of everything so I don't have to deal with that issue in those very early years. As we look at emotional growth, Roman numeral 4, it says the preschooler has ups and downs. The downs are fear, anxiety, and anger. The ups are joy, warmth, sympathy, and love. Now, sometimes we have to deal with kids that really don't want to be there. They want to be with their mom and dad. They don't want to be separated from their parents, and we call that separation anxiety. So how do we handle those kids? Because you're going to have them once in a while. Those kids that are crying when they come in the room, and they're crying when they leave, and they cried the whole time. You can get someone to make that child their ministry. You may invite the parent to be in the classroom. But the best thing I ever saw was there was a kid that cried as soon as they turned onto the street the church was on. Cried all through Sunday school. And the teacher said, "I have an idea." And she came to that child's home for 6 weeks every Saturday and taught the lesson to him sitting on the floor in his bedroom. And on the 6th week, when he went to church, there was no crying. He jumped out of the car and ran from his parents, ran into the classroom, and jumped up into his teacher's arms and told her that he loved her. And I am so happy that that teacher did that, because that's my Jonathan that I just told you about. We really do have opportunities, don't we, to meet needs that no one else is addressing. They have intellectual and spiritual needs. They're closely related to one another, and they're complementary to one another. Intellectual and spiritual. Remember when we talked about concrete and abstract learners earlier, preschoolers are almost all concrete thinkers early on in life. So the preschool kid came home from church and said, "Mommy, was the mother of Jesus the Virgin Mary or the King James Virgin?" Some of you get that, some of you don't. All right, the preschooler can learn a great deal, but there are limits to their understanding when it comes to spiritual and intellectual development. And I want us to talk about 3 words for a moment, and we're going to move very quickly, I promise. Assimilation, accommodation, and equilibration. Now, assimilation is that when a child gets new information given to them, and it said their brain says, this doesn't fit with what I already know, they will change that new information and say, and they'll make it fit. Accommodation means that they get the new information and they say, okay, this doesn't fit with what's going on in my head, and they change what they think they already know to accommodate the new information. And equilibration is when they're back in balance. Does that make sense? And that's why very often preschoolers will say, we don't do it that way. Now, my sister-in-law, I had a little boy named Jack. She said, Jack, you're going to clean your bedroom, and I want you to do this, this, and this, and I want it done this way, this way, this way. That's not the way we do it. Jack, that's the way you're going to do it. That's not the way we do it. Jack, you're going to do it exactly as I told you, the way I told you. We're not going to argue about this anymore. That's not the way we do it. Jack, you're going to go right now to your room and do this exactly as I told you. And his response was, fine, but God and I know that I'm right. He actually said that to his mom. And do you know, something went wrong at a very early age, and he still treats his mother that way, and he's 23 years old. She said to me one time, I knew that my son Jack was never going to like me the day he was born. Isn't that interesting? Okay, so we understand these needs. We understand what they're going through. And preschoolers are bombarded with new information all the time. Like for most of them in September, Jesus is a grown man walking around doing miracles. In December, he gets born. And around April, he dies on a cross. And the next month, he's walking around doing miracles again. That's really confusing to a preschooler. You know that? That's really confusing. And my contention is that's why they get cranky and need naps. Because we're telling them stuff that doesn't make sense. How could this be happening? And so they deal with this all the time. All right. For sake of time, I'm going to ask you just to go down to the page that says forgiveness with the dot next to it. Says cancellation of or release of wrongs committed and granting unconditional favor. What I have for you is a list of needs that need to be met in the life of a preschooler. If these needs are not met in the life of a preschooler, they will grow up incapable, in most cases, of doing those same things for their kids when they're adults. What if you grow up your whole life And no one ever says, I forgive you, I love you anyhow. Are you going to be capable of forgiving people and expressing unconditional love? So what you have is a list there. What I suggest is you may want to copy that list and give it to the parent of every preschooler in your church. And tell these moms and these dads, when life is absolutely crazy at your house, look at the list and see if there is a need that needs to be met. Back off and meet a need, and you will find a complete change in the countenance of that child. When these needs are not met, as I said earlier, what we do is we produce adults who grow up who are incapable of meeting these needs. When we do not give unconditional love and forgiveness, we for boys, we raise men that grow up that do not know how to love their wife and their kids unconditionally. So, in closing, when I was 37 years old, I flew to Florida from California. And I walked into my dad's house, and as normal, my father got up from his chair, and he went like this. Hello, son. And I went like this. Dad, you have never hugged me in my entire life. You're going to give me a hug because you need it and I need it. He stood up and he hugged me. I said, now I have a question. How come I'm 37 years old and you have never said the words, I love you? And my father said, son, when I was 57 years old, I buried my father. And my dad said to me, he says, I never heard the words, I love you from my father or from my mother my entire life. And what did they produce? They produced a dad that did not know how to show affection, did not know how to give and receive unconditional love, and did not know how to express love. And what did they produce? They produced a son just like him. And only by God's grace did he fix that. Only by recognizing that these were needs in my life that were never met, and now I am responsible for my responses. I can't blame it on my dad. I'm responsible for my responses, and I have to fix it. So make parents aware these are needs that need to be met. Meet those needs, and you stand a really good chance of raising up healthy adults that can do these things in return. Do you have any questions? I know you're very tired. It's very late. Yes, sir. Yes.
They are in different cultures than us.
Yes.
So when we teach them, I can feel it. There is a rejection. They don't accept us because they think that we don't know what they feel. What kind of technique do you think will try to maybe narrow this gap or something?
How do we solve the problem of one culture versus an American culture where they were raised? They think you don't. Sure.
And another would be, it starts from, let's say, we have accent, right? We hear us.
Yeah.
So my son will correct me. This is not how you say it.
Okay.
So how can I teach it?
Okay. First off, here's the. How old is your son?
He's not.
9. Okay. Most kids from about 8 or 9 till about 18 think both of their parents are absolutely stupid. Remember that. No matter what answer you give him, he's going to think you're stupid. Right? Yeah. You remember what Mark Twain said, don't you? Mark Twain said, what? He said, when I was 15 years old, my father was the stupidest man in the world. 6 years later, when I was 21, I was absolutely amazed at how much he had learned in 6 years. Now, the problem is, it cannot be done disrespectfully. If it is done, if the response of the child is disrespectful, then they have to learn a way of communicating with you, and they might say to you, Dad, among my friends, that's not the way we would say something. And then you say to him, well, how would you say it? And then you have every right to say, and guess what, son? Among my friends, that is the way we say it. Now, how do you break that barrier? You make a commitment with your kids to communicate about everything first. Okay? You learn to be a good listener, but you don't let them be rude and disrespectful to you. So if your child says something to you, like you said, Dad, that's not the way we say it. Is that something you would say? What would he be talking about?
If it is his case, maybe I would let him speak. But if it is something that I'm going to tell him, usually makes me mad when he corrects me. Not mad, but
Okay.
I understand.
If he interrupts you while you're trying to talk to him, that's unacceptable. But he has to know that when you're finished talking, he will have a right to respond. Now, at that age, after you've instructed him, you're going to hear the most powerful word in a child's language. But, Dad, and but means everything you just said is nonsense. Now I'm going to tell you the truth. Now, this is a skill that parents and kids learn. You listen to me, and then I will respect you and listen to you. You do not have the right to criticize me as an adult, as your parent, and I will not criticize you when you respond to me respectfully. If it is a habit, a bad habit already, it's going to take 30 days of doing it every day to break that habit and establish a new habit. It's not going to take a lifetime. He has to know that you mean it. That when you say to him, stop, I'm speaking, I'm your father, do not interrupt me, and when I'm finished speaking, I will give you the same courtesy. And most of the time, by the time you've finished speaking, and you say, now what would you like to say? They're going to say, doesn't matter, and walk off. If it's something serious that he really wants to communicate, then you say to him, thank you for listening. This is good for us. Now, what would you like to say, son? You have to do that over and over and over and over and over until you break an old habit and establish a new habit. Being born in America, you not being born in America, the American child culture trains kids to treat their parents like they're idiots. The cartoons they watch, the videos they watch, everything they put in their brain is disrespectful. And we as parents have to break those habits in our family. And one of the best ways I've learned to get my kids to break bad habits, they lose the things that are important. My 15-year-old son has no cell phone, no iPod, no iPad, no laptop, no DS. He cannot get them back until I am home on a Saturday and he goes with me to the school and spends 4 hours changing light bulbs. You know why? Because he was rude 2 weeks ago and refused to get out of bed on a Saturday morning to help me. I said, fine. I told my wife, while I'm gone, you take all 5 of those things. He will get them back when he treats me with respect, gets out of bed at 9 a.m. by setting his alarm clock, and goes to the school with me for 4 hours. First time we had to do something like, he didn't believe it. He screamed, he yelled. He told me I was stupid. And I just said, you're not going to win. You're not getting them. Today he's a believer. When I called home last night, my wife said, what was the rule about him getting these things back? I said, the rule is when I get home and he can go with me for 4 hours to the school with the right attitude, he gets them back. And he lives without them. And he's in his second week, will be 3 weeks without these things. And you know what? He treats me with great respect when I do things like that to him. And it's tough. You know why? We're doing tomorrow's workshop already. Most parents in America's culture are afraid if they discipline their kids, he won't like me. And I tell my kids all the time, I don't care if you like me or not. But if you learn to treat me with respect, if you learn obedience now, when you grow up, you'll love me. That's what I tell them. My kids know that. Here's what they know. And here's what they've said. They don't know I know this, but when one was asked by a youth pastor, who do you respect the most? One of them said, and talked about me, he said, why? And he said, because one thing you know about him, if he says he's going to do it, he's going to do it. Period. He is consistent. And this is really hard for parents today. We're going to spend from 2 to 5 talking about these things tomorrow. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I apologize for going over. Why don't we close in prayer, and we'll see you in the morning. Father, you are so good. You treat us with incredible respect. But you do not wink at our sins. You demand obedience because you know it's best for us. Father, we love you. We appreciate you so, so much. Go with us tonight. Let us implement and use the things we've learned tonight for your kingdom's sake, for your honor, for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen. Tomorrow from 2 to 5, we're having lunch after church for parents. Okay, we're having lunch, free food. We're having lunch after church tomorrow.